first storyteller is Linda Yemoto, who's a great friend and colleague. She has produced the Bay Area Storytelling Festival. She was a naturalist at Tilden Park in Berkeley and told stories about nature to adults and to kids, and now she's with us to tell us her story.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming, and for those of you out in the Zoomiverse as well. I am holding a button. It's a rather ordinary looking button, and if I were to hand it to you and ask you to describe it in a word or two, you might say brown, wooden, shiny. But if I told you that this button was on the dress that my grandmother wore when she arrived in San Francisco as a picture bride, how would you describe it then? Maybe family heirloom, history, priceless. Haru Okada Yemoto came here from Japan as a 19-year-old to marry a man she had never met and who turned out to be 12 years her senior. Now, coming here as a picture bride must have been so difficult. I don't know if it was financial problems back home or family obligation. You know, what brought her here? Or maybe she came on her own. I don't know. But I do know that once she stepped on these shores, she was faced with pity and vilified. She was pitied because of her plight. She was vilified because they saw her as cheap labor, or perhaps a prostitute. Or at the very least, she was proliferating this yellow peril by way of her offspring. Well, Haru and Toraji, her husband, went to work on a small farm in rural Fresno. And I know they worked hard because they raised 5 children and eventually were able to buy their own small family farm. But they had to put it in their oldest son's name because it was illegal for Toraji to own land. But they lost it all. 1942, bombing of Pearl Harbor, Executive Order 9066. They were given 6 days to sell their property and almost all their belongings, which they did for pennies on the dollar. And then the entire family was taken to the Fresno County Fairgrounds where they lived in a horse stall for 3 months. And then they were taken by train to the Arizona desert, to the Poston internment camp, where all 7 of them lived in a 10 by 20 section of a barrack. You know, there were no walls, there were just canvas hung to delineate the sections, no ceiling so you could hear everything going on in the barracks. The cracks in the walls were such that the dust and the sand would constantly pour through. They were imprisoned in Poston for 3 years, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. When the war ended and they were allowed to leave, they were given $25 and a one-way ticket out. Now, eventually, they did make their way back to Fresno. But by that point, Toraji was quite ill. He was in a wheelchair, he was blind, nearly deaf. So to make ends meet, Haru ran a boarding house for old, single Japanese men. I think there were 6 or 8 of them in this kind of rickety-looking 2-story wooden building. And she cooked for them, cleaned for them, did their laundry. But when Toraji passed away, my bachan, Haru came and lived next door to us. I thought she was so old, but she was probably about 55 for now. But you know, I was 6 or less, what did I know? She was shorter than me now, about 4'8". She was wide, and her whole body would jiggle when she laughed. She loved to garden, grow nasubi, Japanese eggplant, and daikon, the white radish. And for years she practiced ikebana, Japanese flower arranging, and ningyo, where she created the most beautiful Japanese dolls, where she hand-stitched the clothing, the kimono and the obi. These dolls were exquisite. Every Saturday she washed her hair. And from the time I was about 12, I would go next door and I would partition her wet hair, and I would put them into little pin curls and secure every pin curl with 2 bobby pins all over her head, so she would look nice for church on Sunday. I did this every Saturday until I left for college. She paid me 50 cents. When I was in my late 20s, I got word that Bachan was very ill. So I drove from the Bay Area to Fresno to see her. She was 88. Now, cataracts had long ago taken away her ability to practice ikebana or ningyo. She was resting comfortably in her living room when I arrived. And her oldest daughter, my Auntie Sally, was there from Seattle to take care of her. Well, Auntie Sally disappeared for a bit, and she came back, and she said, Bachan wants you to have this. Okay. So I opened up this white tissue, and inside was this button. I had never seen it before, and I'm sure I looked quite puzzled. And so my auntie explained the story behind the button. I was floored. I didn't know she had been a picture bride. That had never been mentioned before. And why did she give it to me? I wasn't the oldest of her grandchildren, not by a long shot. But I immediately began to think, if this button had been on her dress, maybe right here below her, at the base of her neck, what are the things that this button would have experienced? As if it were a camera lens or an eye on the world? What are all the things that this button had absorbed? All the stories. Now, when my Bachan died, I'm sure she was extremely proud of her family. All 5 children had been, thoroughly middle class, and her 12 grandchildren completely integrated into American society. At least that's what I thought. You see, I had seen through history that these different immigrant groups would come and they would face massive racism and discrimination, but eventually they all seemed to be integrated into society and be accepted as Americans. So I thought, surely everything that my parents and my grandparents and the generations before them had gone through had earned us the right to be considered Americans. Until March 17th, 2021. The murder of those 8 individuals in Atlanta, 6 of whom were Asian American women, that hit me so hard, harder than I expected. Maybe it was the buildup of all this hatred during COVID. Maybe it was this increase in anti-Asian violence. I just really questioned, what did that mean? Am I American or am I still a foreigner? Now, it also viscerally made me feel give me a better understanding of the racism that a lot of the other communities are feeling. I think I intellectually understood it, but somehow deep inside of me I began to understand. Now, we know that the Asian American movement was born out of the Black Power movement, and their main edict was creating coalitions and solidarity across all Asian ethnicities, and with African Americans, Latino Americans, Indigenous Americans. And that, to me, feels like it's the key for getting us out of this situation, for creating a better America, a more inclusive America. Because, yes, we want allies, but we need to be allies too. So I feel it's building those coalitions that's going to, make things a heck of a lot better than they are now. Now, Phil Lim, a fashion designer, has a quote that I love. He says, "We can win against hate. We need to build a wall. We need to build a wall of unity, solidarity, and love for each other. Thank you.